The sinking of the Bismarck. The end of a legend. In the dark aftermath of World War I, when Germany was shackled by the Treaty of Versailles, her navy was reduced, her battleships forbidden, her pride stripped away. Yet in secret, plans were drawn. Dreams whispered of a new titan of the seas. Those whispers became steel in the late 1930s, in the shipyards of Hamburg, when German engineers and shipwrights laid the keel of a vessel that would defy the world. A battleship so vast, so heavily armored, so powerfully armed, that it would become both a symbol of German defiance and a shadow over the Atlantic. They named it Bismarck, after the Iron Chancellor, the man who once unified Germany with blood and iron. And in every rivet, every plate of steel, there was pride, there was vengeance, there was the promise that Germany would once again rule the seas. British intelligence tracked its construction. Reports marked top secret were passed from hand to hand, within files later revealed in the naval intelligence records of 1939. Warnings echoed of a monster being built in the German docks. The ship itself was a marvel of engineering. 42,000 tons of steel, 8 15-inch guns capable of hurling shells the size of cars across the horizon. Armor so thick it could shrug off most naval fire. Engines that could drive it across the Atlantic at speeds thought impossible for such a giant. German officers who saw her for the first time described her as a floating fortress, a city of war, bristling with guns, her decks alive with sailors in crisp uniforms, her swastika banners spread wide for the world to see. On her maiden voyage, whispers traveled through Allied command rooms. Churchill himself received reports, and in a later declassified note preserved in the Churchill War Papers, he underlined 3 words in red ink: "Sink the Bismarck." For the British knew, as long as Bismarck sailed free, the Atlantic convoys, lifelines of food, fuel, and arms, were in mortal danger. And if Britain's supplies were cut, her war effort could collapse. Her island could starve. But within Germany, the Bismarck was a symbol of hope. Crowds cheered as she left harbor. Sailors waved from the decks, believing they were invincible, believing their ship was untouchable, believing they sailed in a legend born of steel. The Bismarck did not sail into the Atlantic alone. At her side was the heavy cruiser, Prinz Eugen, fast, modern, and armed with deadly precision. Together they formed a spear meant to pierce the heart of Britain's supply lines, an operation codenamed Rheinübung. In Berlin, high-ranking officers studied maps in dimly lit war rooms. Arrows drawn across the Atlantic, cutting through convoy routes. The plan was simple, yet terrifying. Send Bismarck and Prince Eugen into the ocean highways and starve Britain into submission. British intelligence, however, was listening. From rooms buried deep in the Admiralty, cryptographers pored over intercepted signals. Documents stamped top secret later revealed in the Naval Intelligence Papers. Whispered of Bismarck's departure. The moment Churchill received the report, he paced the floor like a restless lion and thundered his order. The Bismarck must be destroyed, no matter the cost. Across Britain's naval bases, the call went out. Ships raised anchor, destroyers steamed forward, aircraft carriers prepared their squadrons. The Atlantic would soon become a hunting ground. On May 23rd, British cruisers Suffolk and Norfolk made contact in the icy fog of the Denmark Strait. Their radar locked onto Bismarck's massive frame. The shadow had been found. All night, they trailed the giant at a distance. Radios crackled with reports back to London. And in the Admiralty War Diary, a single chilling line was written: "Enemy in sight. Engagement imminent. The next morning, May 24th, dawned gray and cold. HMS Hood, the pride of the Royal Navy, joined by the new battleship HMS Prince of Wales, closed in to intercept. Sailors tightened their belts, officers whispered prayers, and the sea held its breath. At 5:52 a.m., Hood opened fire. Her 15-inch guns roared, sending shells screaming across the waves. The sound thundered through the strait, echoing against the icy cliffs. Bismarck answered in fury. Her 8 guns unleashed hell, each shell as heavy as a small car. Tearing through the sky with a shriek, the battle raged for minutes that felt like hours. Splashes erupted around the ships, columns of water rising taller than masts. Metal groaned under the strain. Orders barked through megaphones as sailors loaded, fired, reloaded. Then it happened. At 6:01 a.m., a shell from Bismarck slammed into Hood's weakly armored deck. It pierced into the magazines where tons of explosives were stored. In one instant, the mighty Hood erupted in a fireball. A tower of flame shot into the sky. Her back broken, her hull splitting. Men were hurled into the air as the pride of the Royal Navy was torn apart. Within 3 minutes, the Hood was gone. 1,415 men vanished beneath the sea, leaving behind only an oil slick and silence. Only 3 men survived, clinging to wreckage in the freezing waters, dazed, broken, watching their comrades disappear forever. The news struck Britain like a dagger to the heart. Across the island, bells tolled, families wept. The Admiralty reeled in shock. Churchill's fury burned brighter than ever, his voice cutting through the despair. "We must hunt Bismarck. We must avenge the Hood." But even as Britain mourned, Bismarck herself was bleeding. During the fight, she had taken hits. One shell from Prince of Wales tore through her bow, rupturing fuel tanks. Now oil streamed into the Atlantic, a black trail marking her path like the wound of a hunted beast. Admiral Lutyens, commanding aboard Bismarck, knew the danger. His crew celebrated the sinking of Hood, but he remained grim, dictating a cold message to Berlin. Hood is sunk. Bismarck damaged. Situation critical. In London, Admiralty rooms filled with smoke and urgency. The hunt intensified. Destroyers stalked the ocean. Aircraft carriers moved into position. Torpedo planes were armed. Declassified years later, the Admiralty orders of May 1941 revealed the chilling directive. All available forces are to engage. Bismarck must not escape. Through the night, British destroyers shadowed the wounded giant, exchanging fire in the darkness, firing torpedoes that missed their mark, but keeping the pressure, not allowing Bismarck to vanish. In Germany, High Command argued furiously. Should Bismarck return to the safety of occupied France? Should she head to Norway? Or press deeper into the Atlantic to continue the mission? Lutyens chose France, hoping to limp into Brest for repairs. But the oil slick betrayed him, stretching for miles across the gray ocean, guiding the hunters closer. The chase became legend. Radio operators on both sides sent frantic messages. Sailors on British ships swore revenge. And in every report that crossed Churchill's desk, the same word appeared: pursue. Thus the hunt tightened. The Atlantic, vast and cold, became a trap. And in those tense hours, both hunter and hunted knew. The sea would not forgive weakness. Only one side would emerge from this deadly chase. The North Atlantic stretched vast and gray, storms rolling across the endless waves, and in its heart, the wounded giant Bismarck pressed on, leaving behind a trail of oil that betrayed her every move. British forces swarmed the seas. Destroyers and cruisers shadowed the horizon. Aircraft carriers prepared their wings of death. And in London, Winston Churchill's voice thundered once more. Winston Churchill said, "We must strike with all our strength. Bismarck must not reach the safety of France." The Admiralty issued frantic orders. Documents later revealed in the Secret War at Sea files, every available ship was to converge. A massive net tightening around one vessel. In the night, British destroyers crept close, their searchlights sweeping across the waves, guns firing in the dark, torpedoes slicing into the sea. But the wounded beast fought back, her guns roaring into the blackness. Sailors on those fragile destroyers spoke later of fear and awe, facing a ship whose single salvo could send them to the bottom. Yet they pressed on, hour after hour, never letting her vanish into the storm. Meanwhile, the aircraft carrier Ark Royal prepared its swordfish torpedo planes. Old, slow biplanes that looked like relics of another war. Yet now they would carry Britain's last hope. Pilots strapped themselves in. Engines sputtered to life. The wind howled across the deck. And one by one, the swordfish lifted into the sky, their wings trembling as they flew into the storm. They descended upon Bismarck through rain and cloud. Anti-aircraft fire erupted from her decks, tracers tearing the night apart. But the biplanes weaved through the chaos, diving closer. Torpedoes splashed into the waves, racing toward the great battleship. Explosions shuddered against her hull, but she endured, her armor holding, her engines still alive. Then came the strike that sealed her fate. A torpedo slammed into her stern, twisting her rudder, jamming it hard to one side. Suddenly, the Bismarck could not steer. She circled helplessly in the storm. A Titan brought low not by shells, but by a single stroke of luck and courage. On board, Admiral Lutyens understood the truth. He sent a final grim message to Berlin, recorded in the German naval files. Admiral Lutyens said, "We will fight until the last shell. Long live the Führer." The British fleet closed in. Battleships, King George III and Rodney steamed forward. The trap was set, the end inevitable. But through that long night, sailors on both sides felt the weight of history. They knew the coming dawn would decide not only the fate of a ship, but the legend of an empire's pride. The sea lay calm once more, oil drifting across the surface, debris scattered like broken bones, and among the wreckage, cries of survivors echoed faintly, carried by the wind. British destroyers moved cautiously, lowering nets, ropes, and boats. Sailors leaned over rails, reaching for the hands of exhausted men clinging to life in the freezing Atlantic. Out of more than 2,200 crew, barely over 100 were pulled from the water, shivering, half-drowned, staring in shock as the ocean swallowed their comrades forever. The sea, merciless as ever, claimed most of the survivors when a sudden U-boat scare forced the British to retreat, leaving hundreds still afloat, their voices fading into silence. On board the destroyer Dorsetshire, a young British sailor later recalled in a declassified diary, the sailor wrote, "We wanted to save them all, but the sea and the war allowed us only a few." News of Bismarck's sinking reached London within hours. The Admiralty erupted in relief. Reports rushed to Downing Street, and Winston Churchill allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. Winston Churchill said, "The pride of the German fleet is sunk. The shadow over the Atlantic has lifted." In Parliament, cheers thundered. Yet behind the jubilation was an unspoken truth. Britain's own flagship, the mighty Hood, lay at the bottom too. with more than 400 men lost. For many families, the joy of revenge was tempered by grief. 2 great ships gone, thousands of sons never returning. In Germany, the news struck like a hammer. The Kriegsmarine was shaken to its core. Hitler raged in fury, cursing his admirals, his faith in the surface fleet shattered. Adolf Hitler said, "Never again shall a great battleship sail into battle without my consent. The age of the battleship is over." From that day, the German Navy shifted its focus, no longer dreaming of surface dominance, but turning instead to the silent hunters beneath the waves. U-boats. The loss of Bismarck marked a turning point in naval strategy. Her sinking was more than just a military defeat. It was the death of a symbol, the shattering of German naval pride. In secret documents locked away in Berlin, later revealed in the lost papers of the Kriegsmarine, officers admitted that morale collapsed after Bismarck's destruction. Many sailors lost faith in their high command. British newspapers hailed the victory with bold headlines. Bismarck destroyed. Hood avenged. The nation rejoiced, believing the seas were safer, that convoys could breathe again. But among naval officers, the mood was sober. They knew the war at sea was far from over. U-boats still prowled the depths, and the Atlantic would remain a graveyard for years to come. Still, the battle carried immense symbolic weight. It proved that no fortress of steel was invincible, that courage, persistence, and luck could bring down even the greatest warship ever built. And for the survivors, both German and British, the memory of that morning would never fade. The smoke, the fire, the screams, and the endless gray sea that claimed so many lives. The Bismarck sank beneath the waves, but her name did not drown with her. It rose instead into history, into legend, carried on whispers, songs, and the silence of the sea. For Germany, she remained both pride and sorrow. Pride in her power, sorrow in her loss. A symbol of what the Reich could build, and a reminder of how quickly it could be destroyed. Among the survivors, memories were etched in fire. One sailor later confessed in an interview decades after the war, preserved in the Bismarck survivors' testimonies. The sailor said, "When she went down, part of us went with her." In Britain, the story was told with triumph. School children read about the chase. Newspapers called it the greatest sea hunt in history, and Winston Churchill himself cited it as proof of Britain's will to endure. Naval strategists studied the battle for years, lessons drawn in ink and blood, that no warship, no matter how strong, could survive without air cover, without intelligence, without allies. Admiral John Tovey said, "We did not defeat the Bismarck with power alone. We defeated her with persistence, with unity, and with fate itself." And so, the Bismarck became a lesson, taught not only in naval academies, but in history books, films, and even ballads sung by sailors who had never seen her with their own eyes. In secret British reports, later revealed in the Admiralty files, officials admitted that the pursuit of Bismarck nearly drained the home fleet's fuel and resources. Yet the risk was taken, because letting her escape was unthinkable. For the Allies, her sinking marked more than just the removal of a threat. It was a psychological victory, a rallying cry, proof that even the most terrifying enemy could be hunted, cornered, and destroyed. For Germany, her loss marked the twilight of surface naval ambitions. Hitler's faith in great battleships crumbled. The Kriegsmarine would never again launch a ship of her scale into open battle. The wreck itself lay silent for decades, a grave in the deep. Until in 1989, explorer Robert Ballard, who had earlier found the Titanic, located the Bismarck's final resting place. There, nearly 5 kilometers below the surface, the giant still lay. Her hull scarred, her guns twisted, but her form unmistakable. The sea had preserved her as a monument to tragedy. Images of her wreck stunned the world and reignited debates. Was she sunk by British guns or by her own crew who scuttled her? The ocean kept its secrets, offering no clear answer. To some, she was the monster of the Atlantic. To others, she was a marvel of engineering, a floating fortress built with skill unmatched at the time. But above all, she became a symbol of war's cost, of pride turned to ruin, of men who lived and died inside walls of steel, fighting for causes far beyond their control. A British officer once reflected, "The Bismarck taught us that glory at sea is fleeting, but the sorrow of lives lost is eternal." And so, the Bismarck lives on, in the silence of the deep, in the pages of history, in the echoes of songs sung by those who remember, her name forever bound to the sea. The sinking of the Bismarck on May 27, 1941, ended not only the voyage of one battleship, but the German dream of surface dominance at sea, a fact confirmed in secret wartime analyses later released in the Kriegsmarine Strategic Files. For Britain, the destruction of Bismarck was more than revenge for the Hood. It was a relief for Atlantic convoys, proof that the Royal Navy could still protect the lifeline to America, even after losing its most famous battlecruiser. The Admiralty quickly summarized the event in official reports, describing how more than 100 ships and aircraft were diverted for the chase, and how the commitment, though costly, proved necessary to eliminate the threat of Germany's largest warship. Winston Churchill said, "The destruction of the Bismarck was necessary. Without it, the Atlantic lifeline would have been broken." In Berlin, the mood was dark. Hitler called furious meetings with his naval high command, accusing them of wasting resources, declaring that never again would a great battleship leave port without his personal approval. The shock was profound. Documents from the secret papers of the naval staff revealed that morale in the Kriegsmarine collapsed. Officers began to doubt the future of surface warfare, and the focus shifted permanently toward U-boat operations. Strategically, the loss of the Bismarck meant the end of Germany's battleship ambitions. No other German capital ship ever broke into the Atlantic on such a mission again. Instead, Admiral Dönitz's submarines became the true weapon of the Reich at sea. For the Allies, the lesson was equally clear. Air power and intelligence were decisive. The biplanes of Ark Royal, outdated yet effective, proved that even the strongest ship could be disabled if its vulnerabilities were struck. The wreck itself remained hidden until 1989, when oceanographer Robert Ballard discovered it nearly 5 kilometers under the surface. The ship lay upright, her hull broken, but her shape intact, serving as both a grave and a reminder. Experts who examined the wreck confirmed what some German survivors had always claimed, that the crew had scuttled the ship to prevent capture, even as British shells tore through her decks. The truth, however, remains debated to this day. Thus, the sinking of the Bismarck stands as a turning point in naval history, a clash that showed the vulnerability of steel giants and the irreversible shift toward submarines and aircraft as the true rulers of modern seas. And now, what do you think? Was the destruction of the Bismarck a triumph of strategy and persistence? Or was it the tragic waste of thousands of lives for a single ship's pride?